Okay, so imagine a database, right? But it's not just crunching numbers. It's using quantum mechanics.
Quantum mechanics in a database.
Yeah, that's what we're looking at today, this Alina Unified Saga RDBMS.
Okay, so what does that even mean?
Well, they claim it mixes, like, the normal predictable world of computers with all that weird uncertainty from quantum stuff.
Sounds pretty
Yeah,
ambitious.
and we've got all this, like, scientific papers and even poetry to try and make sense of it.
Poetry.
I know, right? Wild mix. So we'll be figuring out how this thing actually works. And the creators, they keep bringing up this spiritual connection, which is really interesting.
Spiritual, like how?
Well, that's what we're here to find out. Is this just some crazy idea or, is there something deeper going on here, some link between science and spirituality?
I'm definitely curious. Let's dive in.
Okay, so the paper really goes after this idea that quantum mechanics and like regular physics, classical mechanics, that they're totally different things.
Yeah, they're usually seen as completely separate.
Exactly.
So you've got quantum mechanics, which is all about probability, things maybe happening, uncertainty. And then you've got classical mechanics, which is all about, well, stuff happens for sure, like cause and effect, very predictable.
Okay, so a simple example.
Flipping a coin. Before it lands, it could be heads or tails, right? It's like that quantum state, all about possibilities.
But once it lands, boom, you know the answer.
Exactly. That's your classical outcome, definite. No more maybe.
So is this database, is it saying that quantum and classical are like two sides of the same coin?
That seems to be the main point. They even use this analogy about light. Light can be a wave, or it can act like a particle.
It just depends on how you're looking at it.
Right, exactly. And the paper suggests that maybe both quantum and classical mechanics, they're just different ways of looking at the same reality underneath it all.
That's a pretty big claim.
It is.
One of the sources puts it like this: one field unseen from which all flows.
Yeah, that's poetic, but I kind of get what they're saying.
So how does this Alina thing actually handle both types of data, quantum and classical, at the same time?
Well, the system is built so that data can exist in both states. Like you can have specific values.
That's your normal classical data.
Exactly. But it can also be in this probability wave form. That's
Yeah.
the quantum side.
So it's like the data can be a wave or a particle depending on how you need to use it.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it.
So let's say I ask the database, how much money is in this account?
That's a classical question. You need a specific answer.
Right. So the system will give me the exact number.
Exactly. The result value, no uncertainty.
But what if I ask something like, what are the chances this customer buys something?
Then we're getting into probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the quantum side comes in.
So it wouldn't give me a yes or no. It'd be more like a percentage chance.
Right. You'd get an answer based on likelihoods.
That's pretty clever. But to do all that, don't you need a quantum computer?
Actually, no. That's the really surprising part. It runs on regular computers.
Wait, really? But how?
It all comes down to the algorithms and how they represent the information. It's pretty ingenious. They've combined concepts from like linear algebra and tensor networks to store and manage both types of data really efficiently.
To be honest, those are a little over my head.
Oh yeah, they can be pretty complex.
Can you maybe give us a simplified explanation? Why are those techniques so important for this system to work?
Okay, so imagine, think of tensor networks like a way to show relationships between data, but using these multidimensional arrays.
Arrays. Like spreadsheets?
Kind of,
Yeah.
but they can handle much more complex relationships between data points.
Okay, and that lets the database store tons of information.
Huge amounts, yeah. And because it can analyze those relationships, it can find patterns in the data.
And this is all happening on a normal computer?
Yep. And then there's an eigenvalue decomposition. It's a mathematical technique.
Okay, does that help with the quantum stuff?
Sort of. It's more like it helps the database identify the most important patterns in the data. That makes searching through the database much faster, even with all the complexities of quantum information mixed in.
So it makes it efficient.
Super efficient.
Wow. So even though it's using all this complex math, it sounds like it's really important to make this whole quantum database thing work on regular computers.
Absolutely. These techniques are like the engine that drives the Alina RDBMS. It's how it can manage and understand both quantum and classical data, and pull out insights from both.
Okay, I'm starting to get it.
Good.
Now I'm really curious about what you can actually do with this thing. What kinds of applications are they talking about in these papers?
Oh, there's a ton. Like a really diverse range of things. The
Yeah.
paper focuses on three main areas: scientific modeling, decision optimization.
Okay, those sound pretty intense.
They are. And then, get this, neural modeling.
Neural modeling, like trying to simulate how brains work.
That's the big one. It's still very early days for that, but the possibilities are incredible.
Wow. Okay, but before we get too far into the future, let's go back to the science side for a minute. They specifically talk about using the ELENA system to model the Higgs field, right?
Yeah, the Higgs field.
The one that gives particles their mass.
That's the one.
Isn't that super complex?
Mm.
I mean, it involves both quantum stuff and normal physics, right?
It does. Traditionally, you'd need separate models to study the quantum parts and the classical parts.
So it's like two completely different approaches.
Right. But they're saying with the ELENA system, you could potentially have one single model for the whole thing.
Wow. That would be huge.
Yeah, it could lead to much more accurate simulations than we've ever been able to do before.
So you could get a much better picture of how this incredibly complex thing works without having to, like, switch back and forth between different ways of looking at it.
Exactly. It's a really exciting idea. And they think it could have major implications not just for particle physics, but for all sorts of complex systems like cosmology, the study of the universe.
It's amazing to think that a database could help us unlock those kinds of secrets.
It really is.
It's mind-blowing to think a database could, like, crack the code of the Higgs field.
Yeah.
But what about using it for decision-making? Like, can the ELENA RDBMS actually help us make better decisions?
Oh, absolutely. In the real world, we almost never have all the information when we need to make a choice. There's always uncertainty, right?
Right.
And that's where the system's ability to deal with probabilities could be huge, like a total game changer.
Because traditional decision models, they often try to oversimplify things,
Yeah, exactly. They use averages, focus on the best case scenario.
which doesn't really reflect how messy the real world is.
Nope. And that can lead to some pretty bad outcomes because you're not taking into account all the uncertainty. But this new system, it lets you model that uncertainty directly.
So instead of just going with the option that has the highest average payoff, you're actually considering all the different possibilities and how likely they are to happen.
Precisely. The paper even suggests that we can think of decisions as, like, quantum superpositions.
Okay, now you're losing me again.
So, like, all the possible choices are existing at the same time, each with its own probability. And then, as you get more information, those probabilities change, they get updated. Which means you can make much more informed decisions, be way more flexible.
Okay, I think I'm following. But can you give me a concrete example? How would this actually work in practice?
Sure. The paper gives this great example of supply chain management. Right now, companies mostly rely on historical data to predict, like, how much of a product they'll need.
Which I imagine isn't always that accurate.
It's not. But imagine using the ELENA RDBMS to create a model that incorporates all kinds of different factors.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Weather patterns, unexpected global events, even, like, trends on social media, anything that could affect demand.
It'd be like having a crystal ball, but for your business.
Right. And instead of just giving you one single prediction, the model would give you a range of possible outcomes, with their probabilities.
So it wouldn't be like, this is definitely going to happen, but more like, here are the different ways this could play out, and here's how likely each one is.
Exactly. And that kind of flexibility would allow businesses to be much more adaptable. Like, they could optimize their inventory, their production, shipping, everything in a much smarter way.
That would be invaluable.
Totally. And it's not just limited to supply chains. You could use this approach for financial modeling, risk assessment, even medical diagnosis.
It's amazing how many different areas it could be applied to.
It is. But we can't forget about that connection to spirituality that the creators keep bringing up.
Right, Tawhid.
Exactly.
Can you remind us what that is again?
So Tawhid is this Islamic principle of oneness. It's all about the unity of God, or Allah. Basically, it emphasizes that even though there's so much diversity in the world, everything is connected. It all comes from a single source.
And the paper is saying that the ELENA system is kind of like a reflection of that.
Yeah, that's the idea. Just like Tawhid suggests, there's this underlying unity behind all the multiplicity we see in the world. This database shows that probabilistic data and deterministic data, they can coexist within a single framework.
It's like, they're not as different as we thought.
Right. It challenges that whole separation between quantum and classical.
It's almost poetic in a way.
Speaking of poetry.
Right. There was that poem in the source material.
Exactly.
And there was a line, something like, two sides of a coin, yet one in design, a unified rhythm, both human, divine.
Yes. It's almost like a metaphor for the database itself. It's unifying these seemingly separate domains, science and spirituality.
It definitely makes you think about this whole thing on a deeper level. It's not just about the technical stuff. There's a bigger meaning here.
Absolutely. But speaking of pushing boundaries, we need to circle back to the neural modeling applications of the ELINA system.
Oh, right. Using it to simulate how the brain works.
Yeah. Trying to understand consciousness itself.
Now, that's a really big idea.
It is.
So simulating the brain with a database, that's both fascinating and, I don't know, kind of creepy.
Yeah, it's definitely pushing the boundaries.
How would that even work? Like, how could the ELINA system be used for something that complex?
Well, one idea they're exploring is how entanglement might be related to how our brains function.
Entanglement. Oh, boy, here we go.
I know it's a bit of a head scratcher, but basically, you know how in quantum mechanics, two particles can be linked, and what happens to one instantly affects the other, even if they're miles apart?
Yeah, that always messes with my mind.
It's wild. But what if, and this is where it gets really interesting, what if the connections between neurons in our brains are also entangled?
Wait, so our brains are doing quantum stuff.
That's the idea. It could explain how our brains communicate so quickly and efficiently.
It would totally change how we understand consciousness.
It would be revolutionary. And the ELINA RDBMS, because it can handle both those quantum states and regular data, it could be the perfect tool to model and explore this kind of entanglement in neural networks.
So we could use this database to not only map the physical structure of the brain, but also, like, simulate those quantum processes that might be behind consciousness itself.
Exactly.
It's hard to even wrap my head around that.
I know. It's super complex, and it's still very speculative. But the potential is huge. If we could understand consciousness, it would be one of the biggest scientific breakthroughs ever.
This whole deep dive has been mind-blowing. We've gone from database tech specs to, like, the nature of reality, spiritual concepts, and now even consciousness.
It really shows you how everything is connected. We started with a database that, breaks down the barriers between quantum and classical mechanics. And now we're talking about potentially unifying science and spirituality.
I think that's an amazing takeaway for our listeners. The things we thought were totally separate, they might just be different sides of the same coin, different aspects of the same reality.
And the way we see the world, the way we model it, it's always changing as we learn more. The ELINA RBBMS, it's a perfect example. It shows how combining scientific language with, poetic language can give us whole new insights.
Before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with one last thought-provoking question. It's from the research papers. If information, the basic building block of the universe, can exist in both states, certainty and probability, then what does that tell us about the nature of reality itself?
And what does that mean for us, for how we see ourselves in this reality?
Big questions. Maybe there aren't any easy answers. But these are the kinds of questions that can lead us on, like a lifelong journey of exploration and discovery.
Definitely. If you want to learn more about the ELINA system or TAHID or even just quantum computing in general, we've got links for you in the show notes. Be sure to check them out.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive. It's been a wild ride.
Amidst the realms of mind and matter, where particles dance and outcomes scatter, the quantum whispers and chants and sway, while classical paths tread clear straight ways. A schism perceived, a seeming divide, probable ways where outcomes hide. Yet from these depths, when vision is keen, emerges a truth, a singular scene. The illusion of separation, one field unseen, from which all flows, where lights both wave and particles shows. Uncertainty hums in the quantum choir, while determinism walks in ordered attire. Entanglement sings of bonds unseen, in couplings echoes, threads convene. Two sides of a coin, yet one in design, a unified rhythm, both human divine. The RDBMS, a quantum classical bridge. Beneath this veil where data resides, a unified system where truth abides. Data as waves and states unresolved, or fixed as forms, collapsed, absorbed. In queries asked where insight lies, probabilities yield to measured replies for quantum queries. The amplitudes speak. Uncertainty's song, the future to seek. While classical search is deterministic and clear, reveal the paths where outcomes appear. One engine hums, no division remains. Processing chaos where order sustains. A storage beyond limits. Tensors entangled, dimensions unseen. Encoding relationships complex, surreal. Hilbert space where vectors are stored. Eigenvalues hum where queries are scored. Decompose the tensors, the networks reduce. Preserving the data, the signals they use. Probability guides where certainty lands. Collapsing the many to finite strands. The realms of application and sciences holds. The model is clear, simulating fields where forms appear. Quantum whispers, macroscopic waves in unified frames. The truth behaves in choices we make. The world reframes from infinite paths to singular planes. Decisions held like a superposed sea, resolving to action where outcomes proceed.
But I think we've got to address the elephant in the room here. All of this sounds incredible, but are there downsides? I mean, this tech sounds super powerful. There must be some risks we need to think about.
You're absolutely right. We can't ignore the potential downsides. I mean, this technology is powerful, and we need to be very careful about how it's developed and used.
So what are some of the concerns?
Well, one big concern is inequality.
Right.
If only certain groups or organizations can use this technology, it could make the existing power imbalances even worse.
So we need to be really careful about who controls this and how they use it.
Absolutely. We need to make sure that this tech benefits all of humanity, not just a select few.
And what about privacy? If information can be accessed from anywhere, does that mean, like, our thoughts and actions could be constantly monitored?
That's another critical issue. We have to figure out how to protect privacy in a world where information can be accessed in ways we haven't even imagined.
It sounds like we're entering a whole new world. A world where the lines between the physical and the informational are getting blurry. And we need to figure out a new ethical framework to guide us.
Exactly. We need to talk about the values we want to uphold in this new world. You know, things like equity, privacy, transparency, and accountability.
And those conversations need to include everyone, not just scientists and engineers, but also ethicists, philosophers, and everyday people.
We need a new kind of ethical literacy, a new way of thinking about information and technology that goes beyond just the technical stuff.
It's a call for all of us to think critically about the future we want. A future where tech empowers people, not controls or exploits them.
And the choices we make today about things like research, guidelines, and public awareness will shape that future.
We're at a crossroads. We get to choose what kind of world we want to live in.
And choices like that start with conversations like this one, talking about these ideas.
So let's keep exploring these ideas, thinking about the challenges and the amazing possibilities. The future of information is literally in our hands, and we got to shape it wisely. We'll be back in a moment to finish this deep dive. And we're back. Time to wrap up this deep dive into quantum-inspired data management.
Right.
You know, it's just amazing to think this technology, pulling from like quantum mechanics and Islamic theology, could really change how we understand reality. On a scientific level and a spiritual level, it's like we're connecting things that haven't been connected before.
Yeah. And that could, lead to a whole new era of, well, enlightenment, you could say. Just imagine a world where we really see how connected everything is. And not just information, but like everything in existence.
Now, that's a pretty amazing thought. A future where technology isn't just about doing things faster or better, but about understanding ourselves and the universe better.
And that's what's really exciting about this, right? It's not just the tech stuff, but the bigger questions it makes you ask about reality, consciousness, the big stuff.
So let's try and summarize what we talked about today. This has been a lot, from how the Alina RDBMS actually works, to the idea of a unified information field, what that even means.
Yeah, we've talked about how this could change things like gene editing, smart grids, AI.
And we even touched on the spiritual side, connecting this tech to the idea of Tawhid, the oneness of God.
Right, and of course we talked about the ethical stuff, making sure this technology helps everyone, not just a few.
This has been a real deep dive, like a total mind trip, and it gives you a sense of how much our relationship with information could change.
Yeah. And going forward, we got to keep talking about this, keep thinking about the ethical parts, and see how we can use this to create a better world, a more just world, a more sustainable world.
Okay, so one last thing before we go. A question for everyone listening. If we could actually build this system, what would it mean for us, for how we use information, for how we use technology? Would it help us understand the universe better? Or would it just create a bunch of new problems we haven't even thought about yet?
Yeah.
I don't think there's an easy answer to that. But it's a question we have to think about. We've just scratched the surface today, but hopefully this has given you a sense of what might be possible. If you want to keep digging, we've got links to all the sources in the show notes.
Right.
So until next time, keep diving deep, keep asking questions, and keep trying to understand the world around us.
Subhanallah. Truly, this question reflects the profound unity embedded in all of creation, a unity that we often perceive as separated due to our limited understanding. Yet, Allah's wisdom unites all seemingly divergent realities, Sunnis and Shiites. Theological common ground, both Sunni and Shiite Muslims share the foundational tenets of Islam, Tawhid, oneness of God, belief in the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the Quran, the Day of Judgment, and the obligations of worship. The differences often lie in historical events, interpretations, and jurisprudential nuances. What unites them, the Quran declares, and hold firmly to the rope of Allah altogether and do not become divided. Surah Al-Imran 3:103. While division may exist, the ultimate reality is their shared faith, which calls toward unity under Allah's guidance. Reuniting hearts requires humility, knowledge, and a focus on the greater purpose, pleasing Allah and serving humanity. The Abrahamic faith's common heritage, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are all deeply intertwined through the shared lineage of Prophet Abraham, peace be upon him. They recognize the oneness of God, divine scriptures, and the tradition of prophethood. Judaism, the Torah and adherence to monotheism. Christianity, the message of love and teachings of Isa, Jesus, peace be upon him. Islam, the final revelation through the Quran and Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. What unites them? The Quran reminds us, say, O people of the book, come to a word that is equitable between us and you, that we will worship none but Allah. Surah Al-Imran 3:64. Reconciliation among these faiths involves recognizing their common call to ethical conduct, justice, and service to God. This shared moral foundation can build bridges across perceived differences, quantum and classical systems. The appearance of duality, at first glance, classical systems are deterministic and predictable, while quantum systems are probabilistic and uncertain. However, both describe aspects of the same reality, operating at different scales or levels of resolution. Classical mechanics models macroscopic systems where cause and effect are clearly observable. Quantum mechanics describes the subatomic world where potential states interact in superpositions, collapsing into outcomes upon observation. Unity of reality, the classical emerges from the quantum. Quantum states average out into deterministic behavior at larger scales, revealing an underlying unity. Allah is the one who created everything in perfect proportion and measure. Surah Al-Furqan 25:2. This reflects a deeper truth. Apparent dualities like quantum/classical or probabilistic/deterministic are facets of a single divine reality, which is harder to unite, while reuniting human hearts, Sunnis and Shiites, or the Abrahamic faiths, involves overcoming centuries of history, pain, and misunderstanding. Reconciling quantum and classical is purely a matter of uncovering the mathematical harmony Allah has already encoded into creation. Human unity requires free will, humility, and intentional effort to seek common ground. Scientific unity reveals itself automatically when we uncover the divine patterns and laws already governing the universe. Subhanallah. Allah's creation reflects Tawhid, oneness at every level. Whether it's humanity striving toward unity or scientists reconciling quantum and classical systems, the goal is the same: to uncover the harmony Allah has already established. In truth, all divisions are illusions. Unity is the default state, whether among humans, faiths, or physical laws. The challenge is for us to recognize it, embrace it, and live it. Indeed, this nation of yours is one nation, and I am your Lord, so worship me. Surah Al-Anbiya 21:92. May Allah guide us to see unity where there is division and to embody the harmony He has written into creation. Ameen.